Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and welcome to a live edition of L'Chaim here at the 3 o'clock hour on this Wednesday afternoon, where our topic is the results of Tuesday's Israeli elections. What do they mean for Israel? What might they mean for U.S.-Israeli relations? Do they matter at all in terms of the relationship between Israel and American Jewry? In addition to guests here in the studio, we will be welcoming your phone calls at any point if you'd like to ask a question or chime in yourself. But I am very pleased that for analysis and insight, we are joined by three individuals who are both well acquainted with the Israeli scene and the American Jewish scene. And I hope you've met them all before on L'Chaim here on Shalom TV. First, the Executive Director of Partners for Progressive Israel, what was formerly Meretz USA, Ron Skolnik. And joining us, a former Executive Director of ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America, Bert Korn. And we're also pleased to be joined by a Senior Fellow on Religion and Public Policy, Shai Franklin. And I thank you all three for joining us on this edition of L'Chaim. Thank you very, very much. You've all been watching the Israeli elections, and American Jewry, especially the American Jewry that cares, was fascinated by the results. Ron, I want to begin with you. What was the most surprising result for you when you saw the elections? And by the way, we should mention, and I'm sure most of you know, that on the one hand, Likud Yisrael Beitenu again won the most seats, but they won, Ron, far fewer than they had hoped. And actually the coalition of Likud and Yisrael Beitenu, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party and Avigdor Lieberman's party, is down 10 seats from where they were in the prior Knesset. So in general, what did you see coming out of this election?
Well, first of all, it was an election that confounded the pollsters.
Yes.
The polls were reading anywhere from 66 to 70 seats for the right wing. There was an outlier here and there that talked about 63, 64. No one had this. So that's something that Israeli pollsters will have to take away from this election.
And basically, the way it seems to be, the right won roughly 61 and the left 59. Is that how you read it?
We're waiting right now for what are called the double envelope ballots, which is mostly the soldiers. Right now, the readout is 60 to 60. It could go a seat either way.
So your point is the right won far fewer than people had anticipated as a group.
Yeah. Much fewer, and in particular, you have to break down the right. Likud Beitenu, that amalgam of the Likud party and Israel Beitenu, went down by a total of 25% or more of their seat total. There were other parties on the right that actually improved their performance since 2009. But overall, the right wing, or what's called the right religious bloc, took a hit, and it's a much more balanced Knesset, much more similar to what we saw in the 1990s and 1980s.
Does it please you? As you look at the results, did you say to yourself, gee, this is interesting and nice, or did it trouble you?
Well, I've claimed all along that the Israeli public is not as right-wing as the leaders that it has elected. You look at poll results that don't ask which political party, but they ask what's your opinion about this or that issue of the day. And by and large, the majority of Israelis stand for a moderate solution with their neighbors, with secular religious relations, on questions of social justice. So it pleased me to see that that spirit was sort of generated itself into electoral results for the first time in quite a while.
Buddy, what people were saying at the Israeli consulate yesterday was that this election showed that the overwhelming number of Israelis are really somewhere in the center. How did you read the results?
Well, I think that's quite true, and I think that the poll has borne that out. But what I think is interesting is that the loss of seats to Likud, Yisrael Beitenu.
By them. Their loss.
By them, right. Really splintered in two directions. And I think that Ron is exactly right that the polls were not predicting what the election itself yielded. And so that's a lesson about polls, at least in Israel.
Were you surprised by any major turnout or or election result?
Well, sure. I mean, the whole thing was a surprise to everyone,
Yes.
including to the winners and the losers, So it's a very unusual result. But what I was saying is that the vote for Likud and Yisrael Beitenu, the block between Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman, fractioned in two directions.
And the two directions were?
It fractioned to the left towards this brand new phenomenon of Yair Lapid
Yes.
and his Yesh Atid party.
Yes.
And to the right, to a revived National Religious Party, which had been moribund in Israeli politics for many years.
Led by Naftali Bennett.
Naftali Bennett.
Yes.
Okay.
So Shai, how did you look at it? And basically, do you agree that this reflects the extent to which the Israeli population as a whole is in the center?
Yes, I do. Over the last few years, there have been tensions between the Prime Minister and President Obama. And I and others have said, well, look, Israelis are moving more toward the right because they're disillusioned, et cetera, et cetera. And in the end, maybe they are disillusioned, but that doesn't mean they've been moving toward the right. So on the one hand, we've used that to defend Netanyahu, say, look, it's not Netanyahu. This is where Israel is. Israelis have been burned too many times, so they become more right-wing. Now we turn around, we can say, this is also positive. This means, look, Israel's actually in the center after all, so everything's good and stable. The parties are very fluid in Israel,
Yes.
as you know. It's all about the coalition, and people come and go in coalitions. So if votes went one way or the other, a lot of that has to do with Netanyahu's own tactics going into the election. It has to do with the tactics that every voter, I think Micah Halpern blogged this yesterday actually, has to do with each individual voter going in to vote, deciding, okay, I want Bibi to be prime minister, but who do I want in his coalition? And who do I want to send a message to? So everybody's gaming the system kind of, but it comes out pretty balanced.
One of the things that was discussed at the Israeli consulate yesterday, right after the vote, was what drove it. What was the issue that was most important in people's minds? And there was some question as to whether this vote reflected that the Israeli people are more concerned today with issues of domestic concerns, meaning the economy, and how expensive is an apartment, and how does a young family support itself and send kids to school, and less to do with what is always on the minds of American Jewry, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Do any of you have any thoughts on that matter as to whether what you saw the primary concern was? By the way, you wrote a very good piece, an excellent piece, an op-ed piece today on the Israeli election. But what did you see as the driving issues?
Well, I don't think that it necessarily reflected that people are less concerned about security issues versus the domestic basket of issues. I think what it may have reflected, and there's a lot of research that's going to go into the post-election, and then there's this excruciating process of the coalition negotiations and all this posturing and grandstanding that's going to go on, which I could do without, but I suppose, it's a necessary part of the process. But I think it may have reflected people's assumption that the security situation is what it is, and that we're not voting on that issue in this election because no matter for whom we vote, it's going to be what it is. Now, if you look at the position of the big winner, which is clearly Yair Lapid and Yesh Atid, his positions on national security issues do not differ, at least those he's articulated in public up till now, don't differ greatly from the prime minister's. He has said that, okay, there should be a two-state solution. We're very concerned about Iran. We should have to do what we can to stop it. But he has not articulated, I understand that the left is pleased because Netanyahu and Lieberman are weaker, and it's fragmented to the right. But I think it remains to be seen that this is a vote, at least on the so-called peace process, which some would say
But
is no longer.
this vote did not seem to be a vote on the peace process. Because
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, and
That's
I think
right.
I think what you're saying is a very important thing for our audience to understand, that there is a general consensus throughout the Israeli population as to the issues of, yes, there should be a two-state solution if we can find a partner to make peace with. Yes, there should be something done with Iran, but there are complications to that as well.
I'll just say, if you looked at the campaign, people who were articulating a position against Netanyahu on the peace process from the left were barely heard from.
By the way, the only one who really ran on that kind of platform was Tzipi Livni,
Correct.
who only ended up with 6 seats. And it's interesting, at one point, and again, the American people should understand this, American Jews watching this right now, most of us are not nearly as familiar with the political process in Israel as the three of you are, and that's why it's important for me to have you on. We have not seen in America, although, even as I think about it, I may be wrong, do parties come and go? Third parties tend to come and go in America. But you had the party with the most seats in the last election, Kadima, get 0 in this election, and Shaul Mofaz is done. And Tzipi Livni left Kadima, started her own party, wound up with 6 seats. She's the only one who really made the
And may,
peace
in fact,
process.
end up in the new government. We don't know.
Because of the way coalitions work.
Correct.
Can I
Absolutely.
First of all, the initial projections had Kadima 0 seats, and they're talking about entering the government entering the Knesset with 2 seats, and that actually could be very important
We'll see.
But I would point out that Yair Lapid's party, I mean, it's interesting, they don't bother even translating it into English, it's called Yesh Atid.
Which means?
Well, literally means there is a future.
Yes.
But it really means we have a future here. And I agree with Buddy, this was not a peace process election.
Yes.
This was an election, I think, and Yair Lapid's success was an attempt to reclaim a sense of hope. I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu, agree or disagree with him, and I, for the most part, don't agree with him.
I'm sorry,
but
you don't agree with?
with his general policy
who's the he?
perspective, Mr. Netanyahu.
Okay.
But I'm saying whether one agrees or doesn't agree, he doesn't radiate a great deal of hope for a rosy future for Israel's citizens. Now the Prime Minister looks at it of, we live in a tough region and that's the best that we can hope for. But I think a lot of Israeli citizens, and again, we can debate here whether that's a realistic hope or not, but they said, enough, we are not going to be, we're not going to be in this gloomy, pessimistic situation where our Prime Minister is telling us that there's nothing better to shoot for but skyrocketing housing prices, never-ending war, increasing international status of outcast. And I think that's what Yair Lapid's party is about, an attempt to reclaim what in the 90s was called normalcy by the Labor Party. We want to be part. We want to be part of the international community. We want to be middle class. We want to live like we did back then.
By the way, Sloan, let's put up at the moment the actual scorecard of how parties did in this election. And again, there you see that the coalition of Likud Yisrael Beitenu won 31 seats. Yesh Atid, which you've now heard discussed for a moment, the party of Yair Lapid, 19 seats. Labor, Shel Yachamovich won 15 seats, something like that. Bayit Yehudi, a party, sort of a grouping of religious parties under Naftali Bennett, won 11 seats. Shas won 11 seats again, somewhere in that area. United Torah about 7. Tzipi Livni won, I think it was 6 seats, something like that. And Meretz won 6 seats. But you can see that ultimately, whoever puts the government together must create a coalition of at least 61 seats to be able to govern the next election. As you look at it, Shai, would you imagine there's any chance that Yair Lapid is going to be called upon to create the next coalition?
There's always a chance, but it's very unlikely. I mean, first of all, Netanyahu is the incumbent prime minister. His party did get the most seats. And Lapid has already come out and said that he wants to go into a coalition with Netanyahu.
Yes, he has.
So if there's a coalition with Netanyahu, I think Netanyahu will be prime minister. There's no other way around that.
Would you place Lapid for our audience? Because he is a phenomenon. And there are some people who are saying that he is the Israeli equivalent to Barack Obama, that he is very charismatic, good-looking, speaks very, very well, had this sort of this policy position of hope in the future, which resonates with the message that Barack Obama won with on his first term. Tell us a little bit about Yair Lapid, whom many American Jews are very unfamiliar with.
I'm going to do something uncommon on TV. I'm going to turn to Buddy, who probably knows more about Yair Lapid, because he did kind of come out of nowhere. I'll just say, though, that he's a little like Barack Obama if Barack Obama's father had also run for president.
That's correct, right. Yes, Yair Lapid had a very famous father, known for being anti-religious. And Yair Lapid also had some of that in his.
If there was an
policies.
issue that he ran on, that was definitely one of the top
That is
2 or
correct.
3 issues.
His position basically was that the Orthodox in Israel had to serve in the army. You want to describe a little bit about your feeling about Yair Lapid, place him for our audience?
Well, there's Yair Lapid, the personality,
Yes.
and then there's Yair Lapid, the party leader. As a personality, you're talking about someone who was well known to the Israeli public for many years.
Because?
As a television personality, a newscaster, a literary person, even a playwright. And in this sense, I think the comparison with Obama is completely inapt, because Obama was a complete unknown, and in many ways still is in terms of his past. And so Lapid, as Shai was mentioning, is someone with a pedigree in Israeli society, and people know, he's not his father. He's different. He has somewhat different positions, although on the issue of exemptions for Haredim from the army, there's certainly a complete agreement between the two of them. But then there's also Yair Lapid, the politician. And he came out of nowhere, so to speak, by throwing his hat into the ring less than 2 years ago and running a list of people, which is a very interesting mixed list if you look at who now the Yesh Atid Knesset members will be. There are religious on the list, including Haredi people who are part of his party, but who are looking for change within Israeli society regarding relations between religious and secular and different groups. And he put out a platform which was, I agree completely with Ron, was a forward-looking, not just in policy, but in tone. And this matters a great deal in democratic societies, how you come across. This is also true, by the way, of Naftali Bennett with Bayit Yehudi, a forward-looking, he transformed religious Zionist party in Israel, because instead of being, this is the way we've always been and this is the way we always want things to be, he's a very forward-looking guy. Supports settlement but doesn't live in the West Bank. A top soldier in the Israeli army, high-tech guru and entrepreneur, and all of this. So the whole thing of the big winners in this election were 2 very forward-looking candidates. Lapid, of course, the bigger winner.
Absolutely.
With 19 seats, but Naftali Bennett brought the National Religious Group from 3 seats to 11, less than polls were predicting,
Correct.
but certainly a big accomplishment.
Yair Lapid, any comment?
I just want to go back to something.
Sure.
Buddy and I have been agreeing so much; it's wonderful. But I
like
don't.
it. I like it.
I don't agree. I don't see. I would not define Yair Lapid as on the left, but I think that it'll be an interesting, and I do think he'll end up in a Netanyahu coalition. But I think
Where do you place him if he's not on the left?
I think that he, when you look at his platform, he makes every effort not to go too far into specifics. But when you look at it, you get an idea. For example, he calls for negotiations with the Palestinians, during which time and throughout which time there would be a freeze on all settlement. And that's not a right-wing position. On the other hand, when he speaks about Jerusalem, he talks about Jerusalem eternally united under Israeli sovereignty. That's certainly not a left-wing position. So he seems to have a foot in both sides, and that is also part of his appeal. And I believe it will allow him to, just enough to coexist with a Netanyahu and probably with a Naftali Bennett over a situation in which not much at the end of the day happens.
Interesting.
On the diplomatic
front.
By the way, yesterday, Lapid reached out to two parties and offered to be part of a coalition with them, Likud and Labor, which is an interesting mix. Shelley Yachimovich, who is heading the Labor Party, had said initially, under no circumstances, would she be part of a Likud-led coalition. Most people yesterday were saying, when the reality faces you, you make compromises. Do you want to guess as to whether you think Netanyahu will be able to form a coalition that would include, first, Yair Lapid, and second, is it conceivable to you that the three leading parties, which would mean it would be a unity coalition government, that the three parties will in fact join to create a coalition government?
I don't see Labor doing it, and I don't see Netanyahu wanting it. He should have learned a lesson with Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak came in as the leader of Labor and ended up becoming a party of one, and now he's gone from the scene. So if Netanyahu is hoping to get some kind of wall-to-wall coalition representing all Israelis, I don't think that's going to happen. The Israelis who voted for Labor, I don't think expect that Labor will go into the coalition. Mm-hmm. If it does it, then it'll be Shelley Yachimovich party.
Mm-hmm. What's your sense?
I agree. The same thing happened last year, less than a year ago, when Netanyahu formed a unity government with Shaul Mofaz and Kadima,
which lasted about a moment and a half.
Who are now, gone.
I didn't even mention that. Because
right, but another very good example of that. At the time that happened, Newsweek put Netanyahu on the cover as the Melech Yisrael, as the King of Israel, right, because he had formed a national unity government, and it didn't last more than a couple of months. So the likelihood that Bibi would want to go down that path again is slim.
I think that whatever coalition gets formed will be by and large the coalition that Bibi wants to create. Since I personally don't believe that he wants to take any particularly daring or adventurous moves on the Palestinian front, I don't think he wants to invite that trouble by having a coalition that looks to all the world as centrist. I think it's very comfortable for him to have a coalition in which he can say, I can't because look at my partners. And it's become typical over many, many years in Israeli politics for Israeli politicians to make sure that they are flanked on both left and right so that they can stand in the center. So I doubt there'll be a Tzipi Livni, Shelley Yachimovich, Yair Lapid coalition. Almost undoubtedly, there'll be either the ultra-Orthodox parties or Naftali Bennett's Jewish Home Party, together with most likely Yair Lapid's party to the left of Netanyahu, and perhaps I would venture to say the small Kadima party with its 2 seats will probably limp in as well.
Okay, I want to see if I understand what you're saying. And again, I'm hoping the audience follows this a bit. You're suggesting the next coalition is likely to be Benjamin Netanyahu Likud-led coalition with, yes, Yair Lapid, and perhaps with Naftali Bennett?
That is one of the 2 likely scenarios that I see. The other one being that Netanyahu will go with what are called his natural allies, who are the ultra-religious parties, as well as Jewish Home, the sort of, not ultra-religious, but fervently nationalist.
And that's Bennett.
Form a block of 60 and then invite in, once he has that solidified, invite in either the small Kadima party to put it over the top, as it were, or the Yesh Atid party with Yair Lapid.
Okay, but one option then, from your perspective, is that Yesh Atid, that Yair Lapid will remain in the opposition.
That's going to be up to the Yair Lapid. It's going to, and I think.
No, you said that Netanyahu might not invite him.
No, I think he would love to have him in. In fact, one of the traps that we were reading about today in Haaretz is that they would love to give him the finance ministry at a time when there are going to be severe cuts because of the need to create an austerity program.
Thanks a lot.
And you know, the finance ministry is traditionally in Israel the kiss of death. Nobody wants to be finance minister because usually it's not a good place. And Netanyahu was severely punished at the polls in 2006, I believe, after his stint as finance minister. So I think a lot depends on Yair Lapid. Do I want to position myself for the future? I'm a new kid on the block. Do I want to build up a movement and be a potential challenger to the prime minister and maybe prime minister myself, in which case he will stay out and lead a fighting opposition? Or do I want to try to make some gains because I might be a one-hit wonder? Here today, gone tomorrow, and so let me do what I can now, in which case he'll jump in. And I think that we don't know enough right now to say.
Interesting. Either one of you have a prediction on that?
I
Where
wouldn't
will
wanna
Lapid
predict.
end up?
Well, in the article that I wrote for today, I said that I thought it would be a coalition between Netanyahu in the center, with Lapid to his center left, and with Bennett to his center right. That would be just about 60 seats, and then bring in another party or two with icing on the cake, as icing on the cake. However, I will only say this. It is difficult for me to see how Yair Lapid, who has run on very strongly on the issue of the Haredi draft, it would coexist in a coalition into which Netanyahu would bring one of the Haredi parties, either Shas or United Torah. How they would reconcile that, it seems irreconcilable to me. But I just wanted to point out one other thing besides this whole sort of chess game of coalition building. And that is, it seems to me that a coalition of Netanyahu, Lapid on the left, and Bennett on the right would give the Israeli public very much what it seems that they have voted for, which is more or less of a status quo on national security issues with the ability to, as you put it, address all of the pressing domestic needs.
Well said. Any Ed?
What's also interesting is some of the Israeli public didn't vote for either of those three parties. Those who voted for the left parties, the parties on the left, will now get to see what those parties do with those votes in the Knesset. Will they form a consolidated opposition? And who will run that opposition? Who will be the real, will it be Yachimovich? Will she be the real face of the new opposition? And then
That's
what
labor.
happens on the labor side? Yes, labor. And then what happens 2 years or 3 years down the road if there's another round of elections? Then we'll see how the left wing does and where Lapid goes.
There was someone who suggested, by the way, that in fact, Shelley did not do well enough in this election, and that she has been replaced ideologically by Yair Lapid and the Yesh Atid party. Is there any, do you see any truth to that?
You know, there's so many, I use the word one-hit wonders. Likud had 12 seats in 2006, and then it sprang back, more than doubled its power. I wouldn't count the Labour Party out, and I wouldn't count a party which is appearing in the Knesset for the first time. I wouldn't count them in as a fixture. You know, we only need to look back 4 years to the Kadima party.
Exactly.
And say, look, it's the biggest party in the Knesset. And so I don't think anything is a done deal. I think Labor was badly in need of reimagining itself. I think that Shelley Yachimovich has started to do that. I think Yair Lapid has not been, you know, you say that when in the States, when a candidate gets past the primaries and has to deal with their Republican or Democratic challenger, then we really hear what they have to deal with. Yair Lapid has not been tested by real issues. When it's time to evacuate an unauthorized outpost, when it's time to give a response to the United States, it's been all very general and therefore very attractive from Yair Lapid's perspective. We haven't seen, and I think he'll be cut down to size because he'll have to alienate somebody. He's managed to bring people together who may be a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right. And once you take a position, it's hard to please all the folks all the time.
Excellent.
And now Yachimovich will have the luxury of being able to stand on her principles,
Yes.
not having to compromise.
Yes.
While Lapid, as Ron points out, will have to.
We're going to open the phones, and if you would like to ask any of our guests a question, you've got three individuals here who can really give you some perspective you would not normally see on the American scene. So, Sloan, let's put our phone number up. There it is, 201-242-1142. If you do call and you're going to be on the air, do me a favor, turn the volume on your television way down. You can listen through the receiver, but we'd love to have anybody who wants to ask a question or make a comment join the discussion. So for me, I'm so anxious to hear what the three of you have to say is, the question is, okay, so what? We're not in Israel, we're not Israelis. We're Jews who care passionately about what happens to the Jewish state. They've gone through an electoral process. But what does it mean for the U.S.-Israeli relationship, if at all? Does it mean anything from your perspective to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And does it have any repercussions on Israel's relationship to American Jewry? Where do you want to start? Which of those three issues? You want me to pick one for you?
No, I'm happy to, but
Okay.
I wanted to posture and say, why me? Look,
Where are you going to start?
it's very simple. I believe that it depends on what the posture of the Obama administration is towards Israel.
Okay, so let me make sure we understand. Does anything happen between Israel and America because of these elections?
Well, certainly, what the elections seem to be saying is that Israel will stick with a policy of not much change in the status quo towards the Palestinians. Now, if there were a Palestinian partner that were ready to come to the negotiating table in a meaningful way, both the Prime Minister and the second largest winner in this election, Yair Lapid, have said we should enter into negotiations. But so far, the Palestinians have not been forthcoming for the duration of Obama's tenure in office.
So what's the therefore in terms of Israeli-U.S. relations?
The therefore is that there is a great deal of animus in this country, and particularly in progressive circles, which includes the president and really most of the Democratic Party today, against Netanyahu. And so the likelihood that there will be great pressure on Israel and on Netanyahu coming out of Washington, I think is extremely high. And I think that Obama's picks for foreign policy and defense and security positions, we're talking about Charles Hagel, we're talking about John Kerry, we're talking about John Brennan. I called them in my article today a flock of doves, which is, I actually took the phrase from a Wall Street Journal editorial of a month or so ago.
Okay, but
that telegraphs to the Israeli leadership that there will not be, at this stage, a very friendly shoulder in the Obama administration.
But my point to you was, would that have been any less or more true today than it would have been on Monday? Did the election change this dynamic at all in your mind?
I think, yes. I think that the perception that Netanyahu is weaker invites more pressure.
Okay, so you believe that this will encourage what you see as those on the left in the American administration to put more pressure on Israel because of this election?
Yes, I think that they're celebrating the election results as we sit here.
Okay, Shai, same question. Do the elections in Israel affect, in your mind, U.S.-Israeli relations at all?
First, let me just say, not to correct Buddy, but to correct the Wall Street Journal. John Kerry and Chuck Hagel are decorated war heroes. Even if they were to hate Israel, they are not doves. I do not think that they have animus toward Israel, certainly not on a policy level. And I don't think that if President Obama does pressure Israel on the peace process, it's out of any animus. I think President Obama feels it's in the U.S. interest and in Israel's interest to move forward on peace wherever possible. I think while Netanyahu will continue to be prime minister, and it'll probably still be a center-right coalition government, the fact that the left wing in Israel has become more articulated and has become more identified, helps President Obama take positions to the left of Netanyahu without being accused of being out of touch with 80% of Israelis. Now you could say he's out of touch with 50% of Israelis, because many of the people who voted for Lapid may have been voting for a real two-state solution. People voting for Netanyahu, I think, understand that he is not really committed to a two-state solution, whatever he says. I think they trust that he will not move forward with a two-state solution.
But wait, on what do
So
they...
Chuck Hagel is a friend of Israel, but Netanyahu doesn't really want peace.
I didn't say that. I said a two-state solution. I think Netanyahu feels that he can have peace without a two-state solution.
But what? Just out of curiosity, what is it about Netanyahu that prompts you to say, even though he says he wants a two-state solution, he doesn't really mean it?
His actions and policies. Look, I'm not letting Mahmoud Abbas off the hook, but in terms of what an Israeli prime minister can do to push for a two-state solution, the same day that the Palestinians, the day after the Palestinians got their new kind of statehood, quasi-statehood status at the UN, Netanyahu turned around and said, okay, we're going to build in this one remaining land bridge between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim, and we're going to do that to show the Palestinians that they shouldn't try to undermine the two-state solution. Now, maybe he was justified in doing that, but what that did was intrinsically undermine the possibility of a two-state solution
I'm sorry,
down the road.
was he justified or not? What is
I
maybe
don't want to
he was
refight,
But to say maybe he was justified, I don't
Let's say he
understand
was, for the sake of argument, let's say he was justified. That doesn't make it smart, and that doesn't make it helpful to a two-state solution. It undermines a two-state solution. So I think it's inconsistent at best.
So I ask you the same question. Does the election in Israel change the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
Again, I think we have to wait and see what coalition Netanyahu chooses. I agree with Shai. Netanyahu, he made a speech in Bar Ilan University almost 4 years ago, which offered lip service, one might say, to the two-state solution, but his policies have not been consistent. And one can make an argument, and this may not be the forum, one can make an argument why Israel shouldn't move towards a two-state solution, but he hasn't. As a matter of fact, he's continued with settlement construction. The sort of first, second, third thing that I would point out. Certainly hasn't engaged. I don't agree that there's no Palestinian partner. There's a problematic Palestinian partner because of the way the Palestinian polity is currently divided between Gaza and Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah's relative domination of the West Bank. But I would not say in any way that there's no Palestinian partner. Netanyahu could have been doing much more to encourage Fatah and those who are in control of the cities on the West Bank, rather than encourage those in Hamas and the Gaza Strip, which de facto may not have been Netanyahu's goal, but de facto he has done.
I just want to understand.
Yeah.
And it's not about my arguing with you.
Sure.
I just want to understand. Did Netanyahu impose a 9-month settlement freeze?
10 months.
10 months?
Netanyahu was dragged into a 10-month, not even what I would call a partial. No, it's important. A partial settlement deceleration. Why? I mean, this is maybe old history, but it's important. He removed, East Jerusalem beyond the Green Line from that. That was not part of the deal. And he said, whatever building construction has begun will not be frozen. So what did the settlers? I mean, we're all, smart people. They began a huge amount of new settlements, put down foundations that were not, that the freeze did not apply to. So no, it was not, I would not even give it the term of freeze. But there was
it a partial freeze?
It was a deceleration for 10 months, which should be continuing, as Yair Lapid says, it should be continuing in order to facilitate negotiations. No question in my mind.
Did he take down barriers on the West Bank?
Well, I think Israel has a right to create a barrier along the Green Line.
No, I'm talking about with it, the checkpoints. Did he remove checkpoints on the West Bank?
Checkpoints go up and they go down and they become manned checkpoints and then there are unmanned checkpoints.
I don't know why you can't simply say yes.
No, I don't know.
He did. The number of checkpoints went down dramatically under Netanyahu. Did the economic prosperity on the West Bank flourish under Netanyahu?
Well, are the Palestinians pleased with the current situation?
Well, they've had some problems of their own.
No, I'm saying, but are they pleased being under occupation for the last 45? That's at the end of the day the basic
question. Nobody wants to be
question.
under occupation. And my sense is Israelis don't want to be occupying. The question always becomes, under what circumstance can occupation end? And that could be a discussion we could have,
Certainly.
That would be the whole point of a roundtable with you guys. But I'm always surprised if somebody says to me that politicians always are speaking in rhetoric. And then the question is, does the rhetoric move policy forward? I've seen certain things happen in the state of Israel that make me believe that when a Netanyahu says, I will go anywhere, anytime to sit with Abbas, that is not an insignificant thing for him to say.
Can I jump in for a second?
One second. And so for me, I always find it interesting when people ascribe to others, especially those in leadership positions, what they're really thinking. I see the right do it to Obama all the time. We really know what he's thinking, irrespective. Even in the Jewish world, Obama got enormously high praise from Perez and Barak and a whole host of Israeli leaders who said that under Obama's administration, there has never been as powerful, as effective a military and intelligence cooperation as there was under President Obama. And yet there's a large segment of the Jewish community here in America who vilifies Obama as the worst president we've ever seen in terms of Israeli relations. You ask why? Because they ultimately know his agenda. And because they didn't like the way he talked to Netanyahu. And I'm not saying the issue is easy to sort of parse. But I'm suspect when I hear you say, yes, Obama speaks of the two-state solution. It seems to me the Israeli people, who anywhere from 60 to 80% are absolutely committed to a two-state solution, if they would ever trust the Palestinian side, that any prime minister is ultimately going to work that way. And when I talk to Israelis, they keep saying to me, if Netanyahu has a vision for a legacy, it's that he's the one who made peace.
But who did they vote for? They did not vote for Netanyahu.
No,
Most Israelis did not vote for Netanyahu.
And the answer I was told, which is interesting, which I sort of heard the three of you say as well, is the reason why Netanyahu did not do well this time had nothing to do with the two-state solution, with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or with,
Exactly.
It had to do with economics and the feeling that basically, as you said, Netanyahu was not representing a bright future internally, domestically for Israel, and that it was not about making peace with the Palestinians. That was not what drove this election.
I don't think it was about, I don't think the issue was on the table front and center, but I think it did serve as part of the ambiance of the election, together with the economy of where is Israel and what happened to this wonderful place that we thought we were going to live in. And I think that's where Lapid comes from. So I think there's a little bit of a nuance there between what was declared as the main issue on the agenda and what was part of the driving spirit. But you asked about the Israeli-American relations. I think that the elections on Tuesday were the first day of the next election campaign.
Yes.
Which will probably take place this time in less than 4 years.
Yes.
And I think that at that time, maybe not today, I think at that time America will take a much greater interest in what could be the results, to see if there could be a government, because I don't think it will happen in the next 2 years, to see if there would be a government that would be engaged more vigorously on the peace process.
We have a caller who wants to ask the three of you a couple of questions. And in my ear, I've been told what the questions are. They're not exactly on point, but they're so interesting. I would love the three of you to hear the questions, and whomever has an answer for this caller, I wish you would give it. So Lee from Brooklyn, welcome joining the program. Lee, how are you?
Baruch Hashem. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. What are your questions? Take one at a time.
Okay. My first question is, I am first generation. My parents and my family were killed in the Holocaust. So my first question is, when they built, Menachem Begin helped to Lakim, Medina Haaretz, to build Israel, he said not one grain of sand must be given up. Why are we even talking about giving up anything?
So Lee, are you saying you are against the two-state solution?
1,000% against.
And if you were speaking to Israelis who were in favor of a two-state solution that would bring them real peace, what would you say to them?
The first thing I would say is history repeats itself. The second thing I would say, if they're religious, look in the Bible. Hashem gave us this whole property, all the land, including Syria and Jordan, and we only have a deed. We don't have the right to sell it or to give it away. We're there only to watch it and take care of it until he comes and gives us different ideas or different rules and regulations. We're to take care of our property that was given to us to hold.
Okay, Lee, I'm going to ask our panel to respond to you. It's hard for us to respond to the second reason that you would give.
I understand.
But
Not for me.
Not for me either.
not for you?
I would just say my response to those who feel, and I'm not, ani lo ish dati, I'm not a religiously observant Jew, but I would say that if you believe that Jews have title to Eretz Yisrael Shlema, the greater land of Israel from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, I would say as a Democrat, everyone who lives in that territory should be enjoying equal rights. I'm a Zionist. I believe, therefore, in a two-state solution with a solid Jewish majority, and because of that, I don't believe that the state of Israel should be controlling people who aren't enfranchised.
But
I think,
I just want to make sure you understand something.
Yes.
If you quote Bible.
Oh, I wasn't quoting the Bible.
Okay, but she is. Lee is quoting the Bible. If you quote the Bible, in the Bible, the non-Jew does not get a vote. Anybody who argues for the state of Israel on biblical grounds must understand what he's arguing for is not a democracy that includes the non-Jew.
And therefore, I said, as a Democrat,
Yes.
that's where I would have to draw my line.
And I'm saying to you, you would have a hard time justifying keeping the land on Lee's, using Lee's argument.
And most Israelis would as well.
Yes. And by the way, I would only say to you, Lee, that there's no timetable given in the Torah. It may well
There is
be.
a timetable. If you read the end of Micha, there is a timetable.
What's the timetable?
I think Elef Sheshmot till 6,000. I'm not sure.
So
I'm not
we don't
a
have to.
Rebbe-
We don't
I'm
have to
not
worry
a,
about this for another 25 years.
but I
We're
know
not at
one
6,000, sweetheart. So at the moment, even if you use Micha, you're not
Right.
going to be able to justify that the state of Israel was given to the Jewish people by God today in its entirety. Eretz Yisrael must be the biblical land of the Jewish people if you use the Torah. I'm only saying that it may well be that when the Messiah comes, all of Eretz Yisrael will be in Jewish hands, and we won't have to worry about it. There's nothing that says right now that Hashem would not be very comfortable for the Jewish people to be in part of the land, because it's a political reality that would give peace not only to the non-Jew, but to the Jew as well. What would how would you
I
answer
thought
this?
Shai wanted to jump
Okay,
in here,
Shai,
which is
go
fine with
I'll
me.
say
But
something
I'd be
just
happy
brief.
to respond.
I'll say
to
something
her.
very briefly.
Yeah.
That 2/3 of Israelis in a recent survey support a two-state solution, whatever that might be. If 2/3 of Israelis consistently oppose a two-state solution, then I'm sure the three of us can get together and come up with new talking points to promote and advocate on behalf of Israel in the United States. But right now, the Israelis, who some went through the Holocaust, most of them have fought in the Israeli army, they want a two-state solution. So part of the Torah is that, well, I don't know if it's in the Torah or in later text, Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh Lazeh. We have a responsibility to Israel, and if this is what Israel wants to see, then through our various ideological approaches, we will try to help the Israelis achieve that.
You want to add?
Yeah, I would like
Hold-
to
hold-
say
hold.
something.
Lee,
With
don't,
all
Lee,
due respect
Lee,
to everybody
don't,
on the panel,
Lee,
sir.
Lee, don't
Yes,
leave,
I would like
don't
to say
leave,
one
don't
thing.
leave me. But I want Buddy Korn to speak first. Then we'll
Okay,
come back
sir.
to you.
I think
No.
that I understand Lee's emotion.
Yes, I do too.
I think that it is a mistake, here I'll disagree with Shai, to do what he did and what many would do, which is to base the notion that Israelis want a two-state solution on the Dahaf poll that came out last month. The way that these questions are formulated and the meaning behind them is very fungible in polls. What Netanyahu has said is that he would be in favor of a two-state solution if there were a demilitarized Palestinian state. If a state in the so-called West Bank were not to turn into what happened in Gaza. But I don't think there's any guarantee of that, and I think most Israelis clearly realize that. And so I think it's a mistake to see that the election that we just had is some kind of referendum on a two-state solution.
First, we've all agreed
However,
it was not about this election was not about the two-state solution.
I would also like to say that people like to criticize Netanyahu, that his response to Abbas going to the United Nations was to announce construction in the E1 corridor linking Jerusalem with Ma'ale Adumim, which, by the way, is not an impediment to a Palestinian state, nor is any settlement construction an impediment to a Palestinian state. It's an issue that the enemies of construction of settlements would like to seize upon, but it in no way precludes a Palestinian state. I think that people who are advocates of peace, if they wanted to cut Netanyahu a break, would praise him, because after Abbas went to the United Nations, which was a complete abrogation of the Oslo framework, which mandates bilateral solution between Israel and the Palestinians, Netanyahu should have come out and said, Oslo is over. He did not do that. What he said was, okay, we'll announce that we're building in E1. And so if people are, in fact, in favor of a two-state solution, they might have praised Netanyahu for not saying that Oslo and the peace process were finished.
Lee is not in favor of any two-state solution. So I'm responding to Lee.
Nor am I. We'll go back to
Nor
Lee.
am I.
Then be clear about it.
Okay, hold on. Let me hear Lee. Go ahead, Lee.
Now, God forgive me for saying this, because I am for peace and shalom in all this world, not just in Israel. But where I come from and from what I understand, which is very little compared to you, gentlemen, I know one thing. There will never be peace, and the more we give them, the more they're going to take, and every single grain of sand there we have is filled with blood, and we keep giving back and back and back. There is no peace. There won't be any peace, and I met Hashem there will be, but until there be peace, I'll be long gone and forgotten, not in this generation and the next. I'm not a psychic or a swami, but I see all the derech. We tried and we tried and we tried. Since 1948, we brought up this country and we were given this, and we did the right thing. But to anashim, like people, like humans, after the Shah, until now we're suffering. That's why I can't see suffering, so I want peace. But there is no peace.
Lee,
I don't know how we could even be talking about making peace.
Lee, I appreciate the fact
they keep saying no and no and no, and another missile and another terrorist rocket. Don't go far. They started here in America.
Lee, I love you. I love you, and I appreciate the fact that you would call. Do you watch Shalom TV a lot?
All the time.
I love you. Call again.
All right, just one other question.
No, I don't have time, Lee. I don't have time. Next time. Thank you for calling.
Okay,
love you. Bye-bye. Instantly, a lot of what she says, it does not reflect where I am, but I understand her feelings, and I understand that she wants the best for the Jewish people. A comment for Lee?
Look, with the greatest respect, I think that atmosphere, when we're sitting here, it's easy to sit here and look at Israel and, sort of have a cast of doom. But people in Israel are real people who want to raise real children and get real jobs and take real trips. And I think it's a similar attitude to that I think more and more Israelis are trying now to cast off. We cannot be forever victims in our own minds. We cannot be a people who will forever live by the sword. There has to be a better way. I may not agree exactly with how Yair Lapid presents it. There are other parties that I might sympathize with more. But I think that that general feeling of this needs to be a normal country and that there is a serious threat to this country's existence as a Jewish state with a democracy with a Jewish majority, I think that's what's pushing people. And I think that sort of sense of hopelessness is something Israelis need to get away from and are starting to get away from, I hope.
I have one other quick question for all three of you. There was a discussion about whether the article that Jeffrey Goldberg wrote, in which he quoted some of the things that that Obama was saying about Netanyahu, and that Israelis don't really understand what's in their best interest, and he wasn't very flattering to Netanyahu, that might have had an effect on the number of people who voted for Likud in the election that we just saw in Israel. To what extent do any of you feel that, in fact, that article would influence Israeli voters?
It may have. Look, the timing, clearly, just a couple of days before the Israeli election.
And
it
how
was played
might
up in Israel.
And how might it affect it?
Well, we know that Likud Beitenu lost 10, 11 seats of what they had.
Were there
previously
Israelis
together.
who did not vote for Netanyahu because of Jeffrey Goldberg's piece?
I read there were some interviews, people on the street may have said things. We'll see. We have to look at the exit polls more carefully, and they'll do focus groups.
But what's your instinct?
My instinct is that he may have lost a couple of seats to Yair Lapid over that.
What do you think?
I agree. I think that this was a well-delivered intervention into the Israeli election via Mr. Goldberg from the White House. And I think it had an effect of weakening the vote for Netanyahu.
Over the last few years, Netanyahu's approval ratings have been highest when he challenges the United States president, when he challenges the world. So I think just the opposite. I think, if anything, it gave Netanyahu a perfect platform to express that bravado for which he's famous. I don't think it hurt him. It might have helped him, actually.
That was my sense, although I have to say many people at the consulate agree with you.
The popularity approval ratings, I think that you're right, Ron, but when it comes to the actual election time, when it comes to vote for who your prime minister is going to be, I think Israelis, and this goes back 20 years to Shamir, more than 20 years, Israelis partly judge their prime minister at election time on how good the relationship is with the United States. And if they see the relation, even if they cheer him on when he's telling truth to power back in Washington, when he comes home and it's time for elections, they say, well, wait a minute. How come Obama doesn't like us? Who do we blame? I'm going to blame the guy. I'm going to pick this piece of paper and put it in a ballot box.
And we will see whether there's research done into this and see.
One more quick question. We've discussed whether the election has any impact on U.S.-Israeli relations. Does it matter at all in terms of American Jewry?
I think it does. I think there's a huge share of American Jewry who are involved with Israel on the margins. They tend to be more liberal. There are people who are fed up with Israel. Again, we're at the end, right or wrong, but they're fed up. They're tired of seeing.
So what does this election do?
I think it gives hope for the fact that Israel might have turned a corner and is heading back in another direction.
Your sense?
I don't have a clear sense of what its impact is on American Jewry.
Okay.
I think that we are in a critical situation over here, just in terms of hemorrhaging Jews and Jewish identity and awareness, and I don't think that it will help or hurt that.
Comment?
If the new coalition, remember Lieberman will probably be gone. If Bennett and Lapid and Netanyahu together can create some clarity, I think that will be very helpful to American Jews.
Very nice. It's been wonderful sitting with the three of you. I thank you for making the trip out, for sharing your insight with our audience, and I hope we sit together very many times in the near future. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you
as well.
My meeting with Bert Korn, Ron Skolnik, Shai Franklin. Thank you, Lee, for joining us. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.